भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः तुष्टुवांशस्तनूभिर्दशेम देवहितं यदायुः मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. Friends, what I'm going to share with you is a reflection of my whole of my life. I have jotted down this reflection in few pages. In order to save time, I would like to read it out because my habit is that if I start talking extempore, I may go somewhere else. And so, it is better to be on the topic, and so nicely Professor Talwar has presented in an idiom which is understandable to scientific minds of today. We all are familiar with modern educational systems, their content, and also with their impact on human societies all over the globe. No doubt, modern education has empowered us to earn our bread and butter, has discovered many physical laws of nature, has taught us how to manipulate nature to suit human comforts, has brought about revolution, as it were, in information technology, has made a lot of contribution in natural sciences, life sciences, medical sciences, etc., has produced good many scientists, has opened diverse opportunities to take part in business, to multiply wealth, has developed highly sophisticated modes of travel and transport, and we all can reach any part of the globe from any other part in a short segment of time. We can be connected to any part of the world in a fraction of seconds through internet. In any way, modern education has converted the entire world into a small village. But you will also agree, although modern education has reduced physical distances, no doubt, at the same time it has enlarged distances between human hearts. Feelings of love, affection, respect are reduced to mere social formalities. Modern education has totally failed to address universal values of life. Even the so-called educated does not hesitate in taking lives of others. People are becoming so much self-centered that they are hardly found caring for humanity. Under the name of individual freedom, they do not hesitate snatching away others' freedom. The whole humanity is day by day becoming victim of physical and psychological violence. At times we find that people want to legitimize violence and terrorism. Even children and the youth have started taking pleasure and glamour and sense of adventure and thrill in indulging in violence. Universal values are being trivialized as if the goal of life is to achieve only physical comfort, and there is a growing expectation that education must empower one to acquire that. This is what the scenario in education today, what is called modern education. I think this is a very dangerous trend. We need to seriously reflect on this, analyze it, and discover the root cause of it. And then we should suggest a remedy for it. Unfortunately, modern education does not address this problem adequately. Hence, there is a need to fill in the gaps. We must reflect on an educational system which brings human values at the center of education, which promotes global mind. It will be rewarding to look at the universal thoughts of great philosophers of various ancient cultures. And since I am more familiar with the Indian culture, I will be reflecting on Indian culture to identify the common universe for universal values. So there is a common universe, and the common universe must lead us for universal values, common values. What is called common good or universal good. We all have gathered here to reflect precisely on this aspect of education. Discovering universality does not mean sacrificing individual freedom. This is what mistakenly understood. On the contrary, discovering universality means strengthening and promoting human bond and promoting the feeling of oneness, sharing of pain and pleasure with others, respecting and loving others, respecting nature and environment, not indulging in violence and terrorism. In short, it means living happily and allowing others to live happily. Nobody can deny the fact that each individual human being is different. Take any parameter and you will come to this conclusion. His or her family and social background will be different, and his or her likes and dislikes may be different. But can this be the ground not to respect universal values? Should one not cultivate love and respect for others? Should one not care for humanity? Should one not discover the relationship between him or her, and the rest of the universe? Sages of India, right from the Vedic times, have been reflecting on human weaknesses. Human beings are required to overcome these weaknesses, they have been telling us all along, through the development of viveka, the mental state to distinguish good from bad. That is what is required to be cultivated. By good, again, the sages point out, one should not understand his or her own good, but universal good. That needed a deeper reflection, and they did that also, and came out with the theory of human purpose. After deep reflection on human nature, the ancient Indian seers, thinkers, and philosophers came to the conclusion that the man carries an enormous amount of potentiality, no doubt, yet man is suffering because, so there is potentiality, still man is suffering. Why? Because he or she is under the heavy spell of ignorance or misunderstanding or a wrong notion or misconception. In essence, man is unlimited, but behaves like the limited. Since his behavior is prompted by ignorance and misunderstanding, he or she has gone wrong in evaluation. Human beings perform three types of behavior. They move forward to achieve something, they move backward to get rid of something, or they prefer to remain indifferent. All these three types of behavior are goal-driven. Human beings perform, act in order to achieve something. Unless there is a goal or purpose, a normal human being does not act. Ancient Indian philosophers of the Upanishadic period went to analyze and theorize human purpose, therefore, and came to the conclusion that there are two goals of life. Immediate goal, they call it Abhyudaya, and the ultimate goal, Nishreyasa. In other words, human beings want achievement, if in understandable language if you use, and ultimately a sense of fulfillment. They further observe that every achievement does yield a feeling of pleasure or happiness, no doubt. But each achievement generates a stronger desire for another achievement. This is weakness of man. As a result, the joy generated by the earlier achievement, the first achievement, does not last long and gets converted into pain. As such, a person gets engaged in fulfilling that desire, which again generates further desire, and in this way, man is never free from stress. The chain of desire, achievement, desire continues, keeping human beings constantly under constant stress. The ancient Indian psychologist went to explore the reason for this, and the diagnosis was there is no upper limit to achievement. No worldly achievement can be identified as the highest or ultimate achievement of life. The moment one's desire is satisfied, the other desire takes its place. One can never satisfy once for all human desires. The non-fulfillment of desire, therefore, is the root cause of all human unhappiness and stress. Manu, the ancient Indian social philosopher, has mentioned this fact so beautifully with the help of a metaphor. He has compared human desire with fire, and achievement with clarified butter or ghee. If one wants to satisfy fire by pouring clarified butter into it, will one ever succeed? On the contrary, higher and higher flames will emerge, as if the fire is asking for more and more ghee. Similar is the case with human desire. For worldly achievement, it can never be satisfied fully. Thus, the immediate goal, namely worldly achievement or abhyudaya, cannot be recommended by philosophers or logicians as the rational or ultimate goal of human life. Then, what could be the ultimate goal of human life? The classical Indian philosophers said the state of fulfillment, therefore, a nishreyasa, could be the ultimate goal of human life, and that is why they go on recommending that. The state of fulfillment is the state of desirelessness. Only when there is a total cessation of a desire, one can be in the state of fulfillment and peace. This is, in fact, the state of self-realization or salvation or freedom from bondage in whatever way, or mukti, or whatever word you use, which is recommended as the ultimate goal of human life by the ancient philosophers and thinkers. In fact, this is the real or actual state of every human being. According to Indian philosophical systems, one is required to discover this through spiritual practices. This analysis of purpose of human life, however, does not imply that one should stop desiring for worldly pleasure, because without entertaining worldly desire, it is impossible to sustain oneself. We do need this world to maintain ourselves and interact with it. It is a logical necessity. There is no denial of this fact. But what the Vedic seers wanted us to do is to keep both the goals, the abhyudaya and the nishreyasa, in mind. Abhyudaya cannot be logically projected or recommended as the ultimate goal of life. They wanted us to reflect on the logicality of this argument. After having identified the ultimate goal of human life, the classical Indian thinkers concentrated on theorizing the means to achieve that goal. They not only analyzed human purpose, but also human actions, and discovered the causal relationship between human actions and their results. They came to the conclusion that to attain two goals of life, there have to be two means. While the ultimate state of fulfillment can be achieved by practicing the method developed by the spiritual scientists, abhyudaya, or achievement of Worldly pleasure can be had by practicing what we call today secular sciences or avidya. So, vidya and avidya, these are the two disciplines, two knowledge systems. One will lead to nishreyasa, the other will lead to abhyudaya. What is important to note is the seer of the Ishavasya Upanishad says that both the sciences, vidya and avidya, should be practiced together. By practicing secular sciences, human beings can take care of their sustenance and can cross over worldly unhappiness. Mrityum tirtva. Avidya mrityum tirtva vidyam mritamashnute. So, can cross over worldly unhappiness and pain, and by practice, this is the interpretation Shankara has given in his Bhashya. And by practicing spiritual science, they will be able to discover their own immortal state of plenitude, which is nothing but bliss. Both the paths need to be followed together. These philosophers are not advising to run away from one's family and to go to meditate in the forest or cave. Rather, they are advising us to be in the family. But being in the family, they should keep on reflecting on limitations of worldly pleasures, which we often elevate mistakenly to be the ultimate goal or ultimate purpose of life. Constant reflections will reveal the difference between need and greed. It is the greed that leads one to unhappiness. One of the defining features of classical Indian culture is its holistic approach to inquiry. It is their belief that nothing in the universe is in isolation, and therefore nothing can be known in isolation. Thus, inquiry should not be just for the sake of inquiry of an entity in isolation. Unless it is related to human life, an inquiry has no meaning. Following this holistic approach, the Upanishadic philosophers advised integration of secular sciences with the spiritual science. Precisely for this reason, they believe that all knowledges and knowledge systems are meant for transformation of human beings. The spiritual science was particularly designed to assist that process of transformation by asking human beings to enlarge their minds. Spiritual science is the science of human transformation. This is how I feel. Classical Indian philosophers unanimously concluded that the root cause of all human suffering is the small mind, misunderstanding, misconception, and ignorance. Gautama, the author of Nyaya Sutra, the basic text of Indian realism, offers a complete diagnosis of human suffering and offers logical remedy to them. In this analysis, the root cause of human suffering, we have already seen wrong notion or misunderstanding or misconception. When there is misunderstanding, the cognizer, the immediate result of this misunderstanding is this, that the cognizer takes X as Y. In reality, something is X, you understand it as Y. This erroneous cognition contributes to various emotions and attitude formations. Once a good or bad attitude is formed, the person starts behaving accordingly. If someone is not your enemy and you have taken it to be an enemy, you start behaving with him just like an enemy. And all along, you go on behaving with him like an enemy. Or even the other way around. The behavior, good or bad, leaves behind impressions in the self. These impressions become responsible to enter into the cycle of birth and death and birth. And as long as the person is in that cycle of birth and rebirth, he or she is bound to suffer. Then what is the way out? Gautama says that since the root cause diagnosis has been done, if the diagnosis is true, cause has been discovered, and the cause and effect, we are hearing in the morning that there is some stage where the cause and effect relationship one has to cross. But here, since it is a realistic system, he says that even that is based on the idea of cause and effect relationship. So you can never, no analysis is possible sacrificing cause and effect relationship. So we are now analyzing human being behavior, analyzing the world which is a structure, and that can never. So this is the debate. This is the debate in the tradition, and that goes on. So Gautama says that since the root cause of the suffering is erroneous cognition, or misunderstanding, or misconception, or wrong notion, one must try to remove that root cause. Because if the cause is removed, its effect will automatically get removed. Erroneous cognitions or misunderstanding or misconception can be removed only by true cognition. So it's only the cognition, the right cognition, can remove misconception. So all efforts should be directed towards cultivating right cognition. Mithya Jnana and Tattva Jnana, these are the terms. So Mithya Jnana is creating all problems for us. And how to get rid of that Mithya Jnana? Only by cultivating Tattva Jnana. So knowing X as X, that X may be anything. Once the root cause of suffering is not there, its effect, namely attitude, will disappear. And when the attitudes are not there, their effect, namely unwanted behavior, will vanish. When there are no unwanted behavior, their effects, namely the left behind impressions, will vanish. And once the impressions are not left in the self, the person cannot enter into the cycle of birth and rebirth. And in this way, the person will be free from all suffering for all time to come, logically speaking. Indian philosophical systems are systems of transforming human beings from their limited or conditioned state. We are all in conditioned state, and therefore we are suffering. But that is not our own state. We must go back to deconditioned state. And that should be done through a program of education. State unlimited or deconditioned state. It may sound ideal, or somebody say unrealistic, or unrealizable. But look at Chandogya Upanishad 8:15, which clearly opines that it is realizable. This state is possible to be realized. The philosopher says, the creator Brahma told the truth to Prajapati. The same was narrated by Prajapati to Manu, and then Manu told it to all human beings. After finishing the studies of the Vedas, one returns home and starts one's family, continues his studies, keeps on performing all acts as per the social code of conduct, maintains full control over one's senses, and does not do any harm to anybody. If one leads one's life in this way, one is sure to attain the Brahman. This is what the Rishi, the seer says. Thus, the Upanishadic thinker assures that if one leads an ethical life, one can attain the ultimate goal of life. There is no need to run away from the family. This was the philosophy behind living life in 4 stages. Learning stage, brahmacharya; household stage, garhastya; the stage of withdrawal, manaprastya; and the stage of renunciation, sannyasa. This is how the theory of Purushartha also emerged. The ultimate goal of human life was identified, and the means to achieve that goal was also identified. The theory of Purushartha too addressed 4 aspects of life: dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma, morality or ethics; artha, wealth; kama, human desire; and moksha, freedom from bondage. Human desires need to be satisfied, and for that, human beings need wealth. But again the question arose, how much wealth does one require? How much wealth should one acquire? There is a very thin line between need and greed, the seers observed. Hence, the theory of Purushartha introduced the idea of ethics or morality. Often, we find criticism by the modern critics that there is no discourse on ethics separately on the tradition, because everything is inbuilt in our traditional ethos, and therefore we are not required to write a separate book on ethics. So you can see that They knew that there is a very thin line between need and greed. One should be always alert that the need should not be converted into greed. Hence, the theory of Purushartha introduced the idea of ethics or morality. So, accordingly, the advice was to control one's desire in such a way that the need does not become greed, and one should not indulge in unlawful accumulation of wealth. This was achieved by giving due place to the sense of morality and renunciation. Tyaga occupied a very prominent place in our behavior. So, renunciation in one's life. Kautilya, the social philosopher and thinker, the great thinker of the 5th century BC, and the author of his Arthashastra, says that the entertainment of desire and accumulation of wealth must be guided by the principle of ethics and morality. So he says, dharma abhiruddha kama and dharma abhiruddha artha. So an artha and a kama should not be, you are free to do anything that you like. It must be guided by a control, and the control is dharma. Dharma is morality. Kautilya was a philosopher of statecraft and polity, and he is advising the administrator also to create a situation in the society in such a way that this can happen, this should happen. So Kautilya was a philosopher of statecraft and polity. He recommended a special training and education for the head of the state. At the time it was king. So Vidya Samuddesha, there is a chapter for educating the administrator, the governor, the king. And the philosophy of governance, according to Kautilya, should be to discover administrator's own happiness, not in him, but in the happiness of the people. So he should discover the happiness, his own happiness, in the happiness of the subject, Praja. He says, Praja sukhe sukham ragyaha. Prajanam tu hite hitam. Natma hitam. He repeats, he says, na atma hitam. Your own welfare should not be considered as the welfare of the people. So, natma hitam, hitam ragyaha. Prajanam tu hitam hitam. So, that was the philosophy of welfare state. I often meet students from political science, and they carry a notion, the idea of welfare state has come from the West. Now, they should read these lines of Kautilya and decide whether this theory has been borrowed from the West or have been given by Kautilya himself. The happiness of a king lies in the welfare of the people. His own welfare is not his welfare, really speaking, but the welfare of the public should be his welfare. Actually, it should be written and put on the table of all the administrators. Kautilya further suggests that the administrator of the state should undergo a thorough training or education in 4 disciplines of knowledge. The first, he says, it is logic, should be taught, because he should be rational. Cultural literature of wisdom, Trayi, and then economics and commerce, Varta, and the 4th one, the science of statecraft and polity, Dandaniti. He goes further to suggest that the king should have total control over his senses, Indriya Jaya, he says. Administrator must practice Indriya Jaya. Now the stories that you read every day in the morning in the newspapers, you can account for what could be the reason of all these stories. He says that he goes further to suggest that the king should have total control over his senses through the practice of yogic science. That's what it is. Educated in this way, the king should rule his kingdom in such a way that each and every person in his kingdom gets not only worldly pleasure. For worldly pleasure, the term used by Kautilya is Swarga. Abhyudaya instead of Abhyudaya, he says Swarga. And for the ultimate reality, he says, as well as the state of fulfillment, which is, he says, Anantya. So not only he should have Abhyudaya, but ultimate goal should be Nishreyasa. The Upanishadic philosophers therefore says, one must cultivate the habit of enjoying life with a deep sense of renunciation. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. So tyaga should be provided, given a central place in education. Kautilya expects that the head of the state governs the state in such a way that a congenial atmosphere is created, and each and every person in the state gets an opportunity to strive for both the achievement and also fulfillment. Classical Indian thinkers thus identified both human purpose of life, namely the human beings want what human beings want, and the philosophy of governance, that is how the same should be discovered to delivered to them by the governor of the state. If one wants to develop a universal model of education, these thoughts of classical India might prove inspiring, primarily because these thoughts are holistic in nature and they are based on deeper reflections on human life. These thoughts address the entire humanity at large. These philosophies are not philosophy of a group of people or a group of country or a specific country, but for entire humanity at large. And there is no place of any discrimination in this thought. One must accept the fact that as there are potentialities in human beings, there are weaknesses too. Education must reveal the potentialities and must help human beings to win over or overcome these weaknesses. There are three channels through which human weaknesses are expressed or manifested. This is from Vatsyayana Bhashya, this analysis is presented. Mind, action, and speech. Gautama, the author of Nyaya Sutra, offers a list of human weaknesses. What are the human weaknesses expressed through manasa, karmana, vacha? So mind, action, and speech, what kind of weaknesses is expressed of human being under these three categories? The human weaknesses expressed through mind are thought to injure, paradroha. Paradroha. You can verify, everybody is suffering from this weakness. Longing for others' belonging, paradrabhya abhilasa. C. Irreverent attitude, nastikyanudhyana. Now, who will belong to this category? Classify yourself. The human weaknesses expressed through human actions are violence, himsa, irreverent stealing, steya, and indulgence in moral acts, pratisiddha acharana, which is socially debarred. This thing should not be followed. The human weaknesses expressed through human speech are lying, anrita vachana, harsh speech, parusha vachana, insulting or pricking speech, suchana vachana. How many of us can claim that we do not use this language? And irrelevant talk, asambadha vachana. These are the expressions of our weaknesses through language. Human beings need to overcome these weaknesses through reflection, welcoming universal thoughts, and systematic training in yogic methods, Vatsyayana says. They need to cultivate freedom from expressive desire, aspriha, compassion, and a belief in the continuity of life, paraloka shraddha, to win over mental weaknesses. They should cultivate charity, dana, protection, paritrana, and service, paricharana, to win over mental weaknesses. So these are the methods that one can apply. Even modern education can follow all these things. Is there any problem in promoting this kind of an educational method? Similarly, human beings should cultivate truthful, agreeable, and wholesome speech, satya, priya, hita vachana. This should be practiced. And study of Book of Wisdom, Swadhyaya. I believe that this can happen only through holistic spiritual education. An educational system which incorporates not only those knowledge systems which generate a feeling of elusive achievement, but also the spiritual science, the science of humanity, which can generate a feeling of fulfillment, may be called a holistic system of education. Education must bring about inner transformation in man. This is what I feel. Inner transformation means gradual removal of ignorance, contributing to the expansion of human mind, penetrating into diversity to discover unity, developing attitude of inclusiveness and avoiding that of exclusiveness. Inner transformation means broadening or globalizing human mind, promoting universal values and erasing feeling of discrimination of all kinds. A popular Sanskrit verse beautifully puts it, everybody knows it, Ayam nijah paro veti ganana laghuchetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. He is my own, he is not. Such considerations are made only by those whose minds are very small. But for those who have a large heart, the entire earth becomes their own family. Education must address this. Educational programs, therefore, must make man introvert to understand humanity in totality. Education must reject artificial division and must discover unity and oneness. This is the truth, and the educational system must allow the truth alone to triumph. The seer of the Upanishad therefore says, Tatra komo kashokaha ekatvam anupashyataha. Where is the chance of confusion or distress or stress after one has discovered the unity in diversity? Lord Krishna too echoes the same feeling in the Bhagavad Gita. One who sees oneself in every being and every being in oneself has indeed developed the vision of oneness. Yomam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati. This kind of a philosophy, this kind of an education, is it not possible to be provided to the children? Again, in the next verse of the Lord says, one who sees me in all beings and all, this is what I quoted earlier. So, one who sees me in all beings and all beings in me, neither I can write them off, nor they can write me off. So, the erasing of the sense of discrimination and development of the vision of oneness should be the aim of education, and that is possible only when we incorporate spiritual thoughts and wisdom in our general stream of education, right from the early age of learning of a child. This is what we call samskara. So education must provide samskara from early time. The system of yoga will definitely prove to be an effective method to bring about this inner transformation in man. I therefore wish that a holistic educational program is developed and adopted by one and all for implementation not only in India, all over the globe, in order to serve the humanity at large. Let there be union of brain and heart, science and spirituality. So beautifully Professor Talwar presented through visual pictures how one can reach unity, discovering the truth. Let there be union of brain and heart, science and spirituality, so that Mother Earth remains a beautiful place to live in. There is no conflict between science and spirituality because both aim at discovering the truth, and the truth is the only truth is one. Only its manifestations in various forms. The seer of the Rig Veda therefore declares, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti. Jayanta Bhatta, the 9th century logician of Kashmir, wrote his book called Nyaya Manjari and said the following: Sarabhu hi shastrartha purushartha paryavasai. Whatever system of knowledge you follow, you take up, ultimately that knowledge system must lead you to discover yourself. Sarabhu hi shastrartha purushartha paryavasai. Ultimately lead to that. While delivering the first convocation address of Indian Institute of Technology, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, the first philosopher, President of India, had said, all the branches of discipline have only one end. Sarva Shastra Prayojanam Atma Darshanam, he said. And insight into reality is the end of all discipline. So we must discover the reality. It is my earnest hope, he said, that he was talking to the convocation address, it was a convocation address, that you will not fall victim to this tendency to view science and humanities as two diversified disciplines, and that those who follow them become followers of two different courses. You should not follow that, you should not take it. You must recognize that knowledge cannot be divided against itself. Knowledge cannot be divided against itself. All truth must be regarded as one whole. Whether you practice this discipline or the other discipline, you should practice the one supreme pursuit of truth. It is true that religions differ in details, and as he said, that in faith and in local practices. But so far the ultimate reality is concerned, they cannot differ. This conference aims at discovering that common reality. Authenticated, this is what my desire is, that whatever claim you make, you give a pramana for that, a proof for that. From your holy scriptures that you follow, the book of wisdom that you follow, from which you are reporting to us, please give reference to those books. So authenticated by their respective sacred scriptures. I would like to remember the very purpose behind establishing this ashrama by Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda Ji, whom I had opportunity or fortune to listen in Pune. Every year he used to come for a month to deliver his Gita Jnana Yajna. Actually he started from Pune. And every year, 1 year, so I came to Pune in 1968. Onwards, every year I used to listen to him. That was a feast. So he wanted this foundation. You know the history of all this, he has been provided to you. So he wanted this foundation to promote universal mind through the promotion of Advaita Vedanta throughout. To quote, therefore he used to say, this is a very popular statement, Chinmaya International Foundation stands a bridge between past and present, east and west, science and spirituality, Pandit and the public. That's what he used to say. But all this for what? Obviously, to promote universal brotherhood by discovering one and the same reality everywhere. What a better event can there be to achieve this goal of that great visionary than to organize such an international event to globalize human minds? I would like to conclude with the following statement from Swami Vivekananda's book, very, very well reflected. I have read another book like this, What Religion Is. He reflects on religion and says, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, both external and internal. Do this either by work or by worship. So there is no need of telling don't go to the church or don't go to the temple. Don't visit this place of worship or that place of worship. Adopt any way. What is important is the thought of unity. And that unity must be all along guiding us. That thought must be guiding human being to go ahead and discover oneself. So he says, adopt any method. Do this by work. You can discover that truth. Or worship. Or psychic control. Or philosophy. By one or more or all of these. And free yourself. This is the whole of religion, he says. This is the sum and substance of religion. And in this understanding, this should be the understanding of religion. I congratulate Acharya, Swami Advayananda Ji, and Dr. Dilip Rana for accepting my suggestion and allowing this event to happen, materializing the vision of Gurudev Chinmayananda. Thank you very much for your kind patient hearing.